very excited to hear your thoughts on this new project. This is Mechanizing Agriculture, Impacts on Labor and Productivity, joined with Namrata Kala at Sloan. So we know that mechanization is a primary feature of modern agriculture. And in general, is a significant automation technology that we think requires some further study. In particular, because governments in the developing world are engaging in heavy subsidies of purchase of equipment to increase mechanization. But the reality is that until today, we know little about the marginal returns to these mechanizations and to this mechanization, and we have descriptive studies of how mechanization changes the agriculture sector, but there is little evidence on causal effects. So what we're going to do in this project is we're going to try to scratch the tip of the iceberg. We're not going to fully answer that question, but we're going to start somewhere. So we're going to think about how mechanization impacts the rural economies with a particular focus on a labor displacement effect, on measuring this labor displacement effect, on trying to understand total factor productivity changes in response to mechanization, farming households' income, and as I said at the beginning, the marginal returns to mechanization. Now, this is a very important input if you want to think about the process of structural change and the impact of technology adoption on structural change more broadly, although this is not going to be part of the project that I'm describing. So what did we do to estimate these marginal returns? We basically ran a randomized control trial, changing the cost of equipment services for farmers. And we combined the results from that RCT with a structural model of task, a la Acemoglu and Otter, for those that know what I'm talking about, to be able to structurally estimate what these marginal returns are. So what's the intervention? We went to Karnataka, India, where the level of farming engagement with rental markets is relatively large. We ran a census of households in about 200 villages, and we find that 85% of these farmers have some engagement with rental markets. Now, typically those engagements happen because there is a farmer that owns equipment are rented to other farmers in the area. But since 2016, the government in Karnataka has been subsidizing the creation of these custom hiring centers, which are basically hubs that hold equipment that also rent to the farmers at a slightly subsidized rate. Now, of course, when they are running at capacity, what these custom hiring centers can do is they can tap on the capacity from owners to pretty much like an Uber meet demand. So what did we do with the intervention? We implemented lotteries for subsidies that consist in two elements: a voucher for about 2 hours of mechanization of standard implements that they use, and a cash transfer of similar amount. Okay, we randomized both the vouchers and the cash sizes. I don't have time to talk about the details of the sizes. Happy to talk about more during the discussion period, or if not, look at it in the paper. The information, we also gave them information about the prices and the location of the nearest custom hiring center. And what is key for us is that we allow these farmers to redeem these vouchers anytime during the Kharif season, which is between June and October. So they were basically optimizing when to use this equipment and what type of equipment to use. So what did we, to assess what we find, we're basically running a regression of the outcome of interest on the mechanization treatment and an additional leg that is giving us the additional effect of having cash, which is the mechanization voucher and the cash. And we got a take-up rate of about 30%, which is relatively large for interventions that hold vouchers, that work on vouchers. Now, in terms of mechanization hours, what we found is we found an additional hour of mechanization due to the intervention. That's an elasticity of about 15%. Now, all that mechanization happened at the land preparation stage. because these farmers are not really mechanized in other stages of farming, okay? Now, what happened in terms of labor in that particular stage? What we see is we see that family labor pulls back, but higher labor doesn't move. In other stages, yes, higher labor moves, particularly for women, and we saw a paper yesterday about these effects. But we also find that family labor pulls back, okay? So the takeaway is that mechanization is generating labor savings in other stages, potentially because it's improving, the land preparation stage, so there is less weeding to do later on, but it's also dropping family labor. And what we find is in our intervention, we have very detailed data on the tasks that all these workers were engaging on. And we know that the family labor savings concentrated in those members that were involved in supervision activities, consistent with the idea that there is some sort of supervision that needs to take place or contracting fictions to hire labor, and the mechanization intervention is also helping in that dimension. We also find that non-agricultural income goes up for the treated farmers, and is worth about one season, the agricultural income of a season. As I said at the beginning, we're interested in the marginal returns to capital. And the problem is that even with an RCT, the exogenous variation that you generate is not enough to generate a valid IV for the changes in capital, because to the extent that capital and labor have different productivity in the performance of this task, when you mechanize more tasks, you're also changing total factor productivity for the farm. And that's typically what is going to be in a residual of a standard regression to compute marginal returns. So we combine this with a structural model to be able to assess what the returns to mechanization are and to study contracting frictions, although unfortunately I don't have time to talk about that. So what we do find is that through this combination of the elasticities from the experiment and the structural model of tax replacement, the returns to mechanizable task is about 36%. There are no changes in output and profits, and the returns on the subsidy in terms of how much additional income and input savings these farmers have are about 28%. So what we think we did is we documented the causal short-run impact of mechanization on labor and productivity, and we are hoping that many of the insights from this study are going to be informative to understand general equilibrium effects and more broadly the impact of mechanization on agricultural productivity and structural change. So I see that there are comments on the chat. Let me see. Oh no, sorry, there are none. So I'll just take question.
Can you explain the 36% return and the second bullet does not change in output and profits per acre?
Yes, so what happens is that the elasticity of this object, which is total output, think of Y as total output, is not moving with mechanization. We see that so this I is the share of tasks that are performed by capital versus labor. So the share of tasks is moving, okay? Output is not moving, so what's going to end up happening is that TFP, at least in the short run, is going down. Now, this is not entirely, you can't really,
how you measure the
have
return?
labor and land and other inputs.
What's the meaning of the return?
Sorry?
What's the meaning of the 36%?
The 36% is a return on mechanizable tasks. So through the structural model, you can figure out what this alpha is going to be. Now, the only way to figure out what alpha is going to be is you need to have a prediction for how the threshold for mechanizable task moves.
So then by return, you mean that what is the elasticity of output with respect to mechanization? Or?
No, by the return, I mean, what would be the marginal return? Yes, that would be the elasticity. Yes, exactly. So that would be the elasticity of output to the tasks that could be potentially mechanized. And that elasticity is alpha. So if I could mechanize all the tasks, if I had all the tasks mechanized, that's exactly what you will get. That's exactly the elasticity.
Hi, Julieta. Very
Yeah.
nice paper. So do you find any, or do you have a way of measuring any spillovers of people taking up on mechanizing that do not receive the voucher?
Yeah, so I'm happy you asked this. What is super nice about our setup is that we have all this administrative data. So we see all the transactions of people in the market. So we can literally see who's transferring vouchers to whom. Now, in equilibrium, what happened is that there was very little of this. Okay, we were set up we were hoping to pick up all these transfers. We saw very little of this. We also saw very little spillovers because what ended up happening is that the intervention seemed large a priori, but it ended up being small in terms of the size of the market. So we were hoping to get some of what the development crowd would call general equilibrium effects. We didn't really get at that. But we think still that these effects are informative because it's literally giving you the short run effect of the subsidy of capital. And potentially you could, use these estimates to discipline a model like the one we have in the paper and think about the effects of mechanization or larger interventions at scale on agricultural productivity and the shift of movements of labor out of agriculture.
And do you think
No, we don't have it in the setup.
Okay, but do you think it's all the farmers have very similar kind of idea of what their productivity with mechanization is going to be, that you don't see so many transfers, or is this information about their own, or is that they basically have the same productivity, so you don't see transfers?
I think we will need to explore a little bit more. We actually asked them why they use it or why they didn't use it. So we need to explore a little bit more the answer to those questions. I think ex ante, they don't think that the differences are that large. But to answer your question properly, I will need to look at, what are the farmers that are close by? Who could they have transferred it to? We didn't see that much. I think what is happening is that the intervention is small relative to the size of the market, and that's why we're not seeing much going on.
Julieta, do you see that the reduced family labor, where do they go into?
Where do they go? Where does the...
Yes, yeah, so so what do they do then? Yeah,
so we think a lot of so we see an increase in non-agricultural income consistent with additional engagement in non-agricultural activities. Remember that rural areas in this part of India have a lot of low-skilled services that are performed in villages close by. So we don't see that these people are taking up new jobs in the non-agricultural sector, in the sense that the probability that they report non-agricultural income is the same, is basically unchanged by the intervention, but they do see higher engagement in on the intensive margin in non-agriculture. Now, we were worried exactly because of the paper that we saw yesterday that there is a non-trivial component of home production. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer right now. We have the data at baseline that will tell us, we have a time use survey associated to this, that will tell us in what type of activities these family workers, female and male, are engaging and how they are changing. So we'll definitely, I will have the answer in the next iteration. I'll be happy to send you an email if that is.
Yes, please. Please, if you can send me the draft when.
Yeah, we just didn't have time to do it. We realized that yesterday, we didn't have time to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the questions. Feel free to shoot me an email.